Good morning. My name is Edna Briggs, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 2021 Southern California Genealogical Society's virtual jamboree. It is my pleasure to host session J244 with Susan K. Skilton. The topic is Pairing Research of Alta California Land Grants and Family History. Before I introduce her, I'll have to point out a few housekeeping things. First, the material in this lecture is the intellectual property of the presenter, and it is protected by copyright. No screenshots or external audio or video recording is permitted. No sharing or group viewing is allowed. For those who purchased the right to view this lecture, the recording will be available through October 10th, 2021. Susan K. Skilton specializes in California and New York genealogy and has worked for Ancestry Pro genealogists since June 2016. She has published a book on the history of Moraga, a town whose land was originally a land grant to Joaquin Moraga, grandson of Lieutenant Joaquin Moraga of the De Anza expedition. I'm happy to present to you Susan K. Skilton.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone to this presentation on pairing land grant research in Alta California with family history research. I hope the resources shown here and the fascinating history will spur you to look into records you will find useful in your research endeavors. You may be amazed at how much information is available, and the details are so informative of the early families of California. By examining documents related to land grants and mission records for settlers who came to Alta California, we can find details to identify family units, to describe their migration, and to document community relationships. Land grants are key to early research in California before it became a state. In this presentation, we will examine the early history of California, the land grant system, and we will take a good look at some of the record sets available for family history research. It's good to keep some key dates in California history in mind as we look at the possible records we can see. So, presidios were established between 1769 and 1782, very early. The De Anza expeditions took place in 1775 and 1776. Alta California was established by Spain in 1804. Mexican jurisdiction took over by 1822. Gold was discovered in 1848, and California statehood followed shortly thereafter in 1850. The De Anza expeditions kicked off the settlement of Alta California. So they happened just around the time that the American Revolution was taking place on the East Coast. We had some exciting things happening on the West Coast. There are excellent records from this time period. The leader of the expedition was Juan Bautista de Anza. He was commissioned under the Spanish government. Second in command was Joaquin Moraga. His grandson received a land grant, which will be discussed further on. The expedition began in Tubac, which was then in Mexico, and it's now in Arizona. Locations for settlements of missions, presidios, and pueblos, which are towns, were identified by the expeditions. The diary of De Anza and of other travelers in the expeditions were published and edited by H.E. Bolton. The diary of De Anza can be found at Internet Archive and at other websites. The compilation at Internet Archive includes several other diaries and narratives that were written during the expedition. So it's just a huge amount of information that was written right at the time of the expeditions, and it's available. Families of soldiers from the initial De Anza expedition were encouraged to settle in Alta California. Many of the original settlers were soldiers and their families, and it's helpful to note this when we're identifying family units. If we know who the soldier was and where he lived, we might be able to find his family as well. The names of the soldiers and their roles in the military appear in mission and presidio records, adding further detail for identifying them. Settlements in Alta California fell into three main categories. They included presidios, military fortifications like forts. And there's an example with the San Francisco Presidio, which still stands today, right by the Golden Gate Bridge. Missions, religious settlements, often having a chapel, administrative buildings, gardens, cemeteries, and adjacent lodgings, so rather large enclosures. And pueblos, civilian settlements comparable to towns today. So a little bit more about presidios, missions, and pueblos. Locations of settlements are helpful to keep in mind. So while individuals were often associated with a particular mission, pueblo, or presidio, they sometimes changed job responsibilities and moved to other locations. So you can keep in mind where they were at some particular time and look for records for them there, but keep an open mind that they may have moved to another mission or another presidio or another pueblo. The presidios were established in 4 locations: San Diego, Monterey, San Francisco, and Santa Barbara. And 20 missions were established under Spanish rule, and 1 in Sonoma was established under Mexican rule. And Spain established pueblos or towns at San Jose, Los Angeles, Branquiforte near Santa Cruz, and Mexico established a pueblo in Sonoma. Those that seem to have the most records still existing today are San Jose and Los Angeles. Presidios and missions connected to them were established from 1769 to 1782, and those again are Monterey, San Diego, San Francisco, and Santa Barbara. 4 pueblos were established. They were San Jose, Los Angeles, Branquiforte, and Sonoma. Presidios established a military presence, adding a sense of security for the residents of the missions and the pueblos. The images in the slide there are early drawings of the Monterey Presidio. The diagram is of the San Diego Presidio, a floor plan that was created in 1820. Both of these presidios were moved a short distance after their initial constructions. Finding documents for individuals in pueblos and presidios depends on understanding the very close relationship between them. For example, a soldier at a presidio may be mentioned in a letter from a pueblo administrator. The presidio soldiers provided protection for the mission and the pueblo residents, but they also required a lot of materials from the pueblos. So there are letters back and forth from the pueblos to the presidios. Here are some examples of letters sent back and forth from the presidios to the pueblos. As you can see, they are scanned and available online. This complaint letter dated 1809 and sent by the officials at the Monterey Presidio to sergeants at the Pueblo San Antonio refers to Dionisio Bernal, and it speaks about some Native Americans that were found at his house, and there's a discussion about this in the letter. These Native Americans are associated with the San Antonio mission, and so this needs to be responded to again by those to whom it was sent, and then deal with the situation. So there are a number of letters like this, quite a few, between the presidios and the pueblos. A tied list on the next slide will show us Dionisio Bernal first on the list as the resident of Pueblo San Jose in the same year. These are good records for identifying his location. So you see where the arrow is pointing here. Dionisio Bernal is first on this tithe list. So we know that no matter where he was moving about, he was considered to be a resident of that pueblo at that time. And then you see on the left that there is a census from 1790 also for the San Jose Pueblo. And again, that's the town that became what is known today as San Jose. This letter from the Monterey Presidio in 1847 is one of many preserved in the King Library Special Collections at San Jose Public Library. If you notice, it is written in English. It appears in the digital collection, and the digital collection does not include all of the documents that the library holds, but there are some excellent examples to be found there. Documents of Pueblo San Jose are kept in a variety of places. They're all worth looking at to see what they hold. The documents describe municipal activities, and they name many individuals. Sources for the documents include San Jose State University digital collections and the Pueblo papers at History San Jose website. The latter has many documents. There is a spreadsheet system which indexes showing document numbers you can use to locate document scans, translations, and transcriptions, and it is in a Google Drive collection. So it takes just a few moments to get acquainted with the way the system is set up, so you can go into the Google Drive, which is accessible to the public, and really be able to use and find the records you want. Just a little bit of back and forth. It's not intuitive, but it's also not difficult, so it's well worth doing. There are many, many digitized and abstracted documents in the database. The abstracted documents are very helpful as they will include a lot of contextual information that might take you a long time to find on your own with your investigating. So to get to the many documents in the spreadsheet, you're going to click on the Documents header, and this will lead you to the Google Drive database. The image is of Pueblo San Jose, the first civil settlement in Alta California in 1777, and it was at one time a U.S. postal stamp. So we'll look at one example of a person who is mentioned in the many letters in Pueblo San Jose, and I chose Gabriel Moraga, who was the son of Joaquin Moraga of the De Anza expedition. So he was appointed a comisionado, or military administrator of Pueblo San Jose, a few years after it was established by his father in 1777. But then when the Villa de Branquiforte was established in 1797, which is part of today's city of Santa Cruz, he was transferred to a similar position there. And he's named in many of the letters back and forth in the Pueblo San Jose papers. So another pueblo or town, of course, is Los Angeles. It was founded in 1781. The documents for the pueblo include censuses, which are available in a few different places. Surprisingly, they are well documented on Wikipedia under the heading Los Angeles Pobladores. They're also available in Los Angeles Almanac and at SF Genealogy, which is an excellent website for California history. Note that there are a diverse set of websites holding Alta California details. So just be willing to use a broad search objective to find them. There are a few early census records for missions and pueblos. Note that the entries are by first name only and by age, and we'll see that close up in the next slide. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner, you see Teodosia is perhaps 31 years old, Sebastian's 29, and so on. We don't have any last names. This might seem daunting to try to understand what family groups they might belong to, but there fortunately are some compilations that can help us out. And we'll look at one of those. So this compilation is called Directory de Anza. It cross-indexes the names on different census records, showing us which family members were enumerated in different locations in different years. This is very helpful in tracing a family over time. And included in that are some contextual remarks. So if the researcher found some identifying information that might be helpful, that's placed under remarks. It's also very helpful. Of course, when you're doing research, you want to verify all of the information because you're independently researching and you want to make sure everything that someone else has concluded adds up for you. But this is an excellent starting point. You'll see the second page of this directory on the next slide. So you see all of the information that is listed for their ages, what family groups they belong to, and even who they married when they died, when that is known. And one of the names we see there is the Elviso family, and we see that the Mesa family, in the Mesa family, Maria Manuela Mesa married Dionisio Bernal, whom we encountered in the earlier documents from Pueblo San Jose. Now, this might be the same Dionisio Bernal, it might be a different one, but it's possible that this is who he married, and there we have some clues as to building out the family group. You see in the last entry for Juan Mesa, it says Mutnik 1777. The Mutnik is a reference to where this information can be found. It's a separate organized group of records by Dorothy Mutnik. And it says his age was confused with younger brother Nicholas. So this is the researcher's observations. Native Americans are documented in records in Alta California as groups and as individuals. Many of the records naming them show a first name only, just as with the other residents we saw, which makes tracing them challenging. But sometimes the names are unusual, and that helps. Presidio records refer to Native Americans in groups in their relationships with settlers. For example, a letter from the Monterey Presidio to Sergeant Marcario Castro in San Jose Pueblo in 1802 notes that it is feared that Native Americans have been mistreated as there's an epidemic affecting them. Another letter refers specifically to Native American named El Chato, whom a settler named Larios had allowed to carry a sword and ride a horse. And such details are very helpful in tracing names through time and in understanding the contextual history of the time. Native Americans were brought into the missions, as I'm sure you know, often as captives, and they were required to work. Many became ill and died, others escaped. Many of their baptisms, marriages, and burials are listed in mission records. On occasion, groups of Native Americans retaliated against the harsh treatment in the missions with attacks on missions and pueblos. This diagram shows one such attack or set of attacks that raged between 1830 and 1840. Secularization was a consequence of Mexican independence. This changed the land grant process as the government sought to privatize what had previously been church property. The land grant system was initially ineffective, as it was essentially a tenant farm system, and it was misunderstood by those who were using the property. It was revised so that the land could be held outright with a clear title. Land grants were for large tracts of land designed to be developed agriculturally, primarily for raising cattle. Land was used for ranching, and land grants were called ranchos. Cattle and sheep were raised. The cattle hides were sold overseas. This was the primary economy, but the land was also developed for farming. It is evident from letters written from Monterey Presidio to Pueblo San Jose that ranchers grew wheat, beans, and vegetables and raised farm animals for the Presidio residents. You see in the picture on the left, Rancho San Pedro, which is the site of the first Spanish land grant in California. By the time the picture was drawn, it was very developed. And the image on the right is a very accurate depiction of loading the hides onto a boat for export. The boats were loaded up with hides to the point where the boat was just about to sink under. It was a requirement of the land grant process that a permanent residence to be occupied by the landowner be established on the property prior to the final land grant papers being awarded. The structure was usually an adobe. Histories of adobes can be useful in genealogy research. Histories can be found in parks publications, local history centers, environmental impact reports, and adobes are often landmarked by state, local, or national institutions. The write-ups for those can sometimes provide additional details. Some ranchos were awarded during the mission period. Most ranchos were awarded after 1834, after secularization. The Colonization Act of 1838 provided that anyone desiring a concession of land should present a request in the form of a petition to the governor of the territory. The petition included a description of the land in the form of a map called a diseño. This record remained a primary document to prove the grant even after California became a state. You see on the right there one example of a diseño, and we'll look at a few others. Petitioners for land grants were often former soldiers or descendants of soldiers. They asked for land grants as a reward for military service. It's a process similar to the bounty land grants awarded to veterans of the American Revolution or the War of 1812. Other petitioners were usually from well-known Mexican families or prominent persons in the local area. The petition included a diseño showing landmarks and boundaries of the property. If the petition was successful, the new landowner received a document called an expediente, a copy of which was also filed in government archives. The expediente contains a full petition and the land grant and provides title to the land. The expediente is a useful document for genealogy research, and indexes to expedientes are also very helpful. The Works Project Administration put together some of the packets of expedientes for us for future research for people like us to look at. They're very well done. And this is one example of one of the packages that was put together and preserved. Here is an example of an expediente for Joaquin Moraga and Juan Bernal. Again, Joaquin Moraga was the grandson of the man that was of the same name that was in the De Anza expedition. This expediente is written in Spanish, as it was during the time period. The California U.S. Spanish Land Records database at Ancestry holds these records. They're scanned. The database is in Spanish. However, the land claims database, which holds the claims filed in U.S. courts later on, is in English. Here is a diseño for the land grant awarded to Moraga and Bernal. It shows hills, trees, streams, and an adobe, and to the left you see a compass. The provisional grant was awarded in 1835, and it was finalized in 1841. It's in an area that is now part of Contra Costa County, and I live on this land grant in my town, Moraga. Here is another diseño. This is for land grant San Andres. It was awarded in 1833. The detailed diseño shows a compass in addition to the landmarks. You may note that it was finally patented by the U.S. in 1876. So land claims issues took a long time once they got to the U.S. government. Santa Monica land grant. This is Rancho San Vicente. Like many others, it was finally upheld in the U.S. courts as valid. But this was long after the soldier who received the award had died. And again, that was very typical because it did take so long. The diseño shows landmarks, and it also shows the adobe. Indexes provide excellent details for each land grant, including court records for legal disputes involving the land. This index can be found at Ancestry in the California Spanish Land Records database. Diseños can be found in different locations. The OnLive Archive of California at UC Berkeley Bancroft Library has many images. It also has a great deal of other information on California history, so it's an excellent place to look for information. To see the diseños, or to see anything that is online, like the arrow shows you, click on the eye that shows online items available. Then you will have a list of items. In this case, there are 1,397 results that you can look at. So in other words, 1,397 diseños. And there are often notes accompanying these diseños, so a good deal of information. The late 1840s were a turning point in California history. The new government of the United States in this area meant land claims under the Mexican government needed to be confirmed under the new courts. While the process was reasonable, and while evidence was accepted, the process was also expensive, and it was lengthy for the grantees. And that became a factor in losing the land that was owned originally in the land grants. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed on the 4th of July, 1848. This ended the Mexican-American War. California became a state in 1850. The new government for California in the United States is significant in the development of the ranches and for the evolution of the court cases for land claims. So as we review the stories of Alta California, it's important to keep the change of government in mind, as we will find documentation for Mexican claims in future litigation under the US government. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo required the US government to honor legitimate land claims, or what they considered to be legitimate land claims, awarded by the Mexican government. The records that previously were held by the Spanish and Mexican governments were acquired by the US government courts. The US required land grants be resurveyed under US government auspices. These surveys looked very different from the diseños, as you can imagine. So a couple of things that are helpful to note. Records are now mainly housed at National Archives in Washington, D.C., and the Bureau of Land Management in Sacramento, and at NARA in San Bruno. Many maps and related records are held at California State Archive. However, these records are not online. Land was often lost due to legal costs, growing families, and contested land ownership by squatters. So one of the points I put in this slide is that land was sold to pay debts. Land was used to pay lawyers to help with the claim, and this did use up a lot of the property. Most land claims were upheld by the US government. Additional court cases show land exchanges, boundary disputes, and descriptions of lost or missing paperwork. All of these court cases and their details are really helpful in tracing a family over time. The documents provide dates, names, places, and relationships. The set of records containing the land claim issues after statehood is in the California private land claims dockets. These have been scanned and they are available on Ancestry. This is one image from land claim of heirs and representatives of Joaquin Moraga deceased and of Juan Bernal deceased, who did die long before their land claims were completely validated. Land claim dockets tell a great story. This is just one page of a land claim docket. Information here includes a witness who testifies about what the land looked like at the time the diseño was drawn and how the land has changed. Now, the writing on these dockets can be difficult to read, and dates are sometimes omitted. You see at the top of the page, it says Washington, D.C., 1807 blank. So not all the information is there, not all the information is complete, but again, a great number of details. Timeline summaries for some of the claims can be found in the Hornbeck collection at CSU Library at Monterey Bay. And that is very helpful because the timelines give you a sense of what happened first, second, third, and fourth. So you don't have to go through all of these and put it all together for some of the claims. It's important to note, as I mentioned before, that surveying methods can vary, and they vary greatly in interpretations between a diseño image and the resurvey by the US government. An additional factor would be the vested interest of the persons who may have wanted portions of the property. And here's an example that I found in a court case that is documented found on Google Books and Congressional Serial Set in 1871, and it is said that the boundaries of the Gomez grant do not seem to have been given always alike, a common type of complaint that kept being repeated in different cases. So let's just take a look at one grantee and see what other records might be found once we have found all these land grant records. In addition to a land claim docket, we can locate his baptism, marriage, probate records in different repositories. So he was baptized in 1793 at Mission San Carlos to parents Gabriel Moraga and Ana Maria Bernal. And also additional records can be found for him at Bureau of Land Management and in family files at History Center. The land claim docket for Joaquin Moraga is on Ancestry, and it's very detailed. Some of the timeline of his life can be put together. He was given permission to graze cattle at Mission Santa Cruz in 1827, and at the time of secularization, he and his cousin got together and decided to negotiate for a land grant. That's all documented. The grant was approved by the San Jose Pueblo and was awarded on the 10th of August, 1841 by the Speaker of the Assembly and by the acting governor, Juan Bautista Alvarado. And if there's any difficulty in identifying who the governor was at the time that a land grant was awarded, you can go and look at a list of acting governors for the year that a land grant was awarded, and then that will give you the information. It would have been the acting governor at that time. Here is the U.S. survey of the Rancho de los Palos Colorados in 1855, done by the U.S. government, and it shows you that it was over 20,000 acres, which is a little less than was originally shown in the Diseño. Let's take a look at a little more detail. It shows you the adobe of Jose Moraga, which as it was seen in 1855, built at least by 1841. So it's very good with the location. You can see it's very close to a waterway and some hills. So we do know where it is today, but if we didn't, that would be a helpful guide. So you can compare here the Diseño and the US survey. They are really quite different. The Diseño is very general. It indicates a few landmarks, while the US survey is extremely detailed. Just two different approaches to seeing the same piece of land. When a land grant was formally upheld by the US government, the land patent entered the Bureau of Land Management Index. An image of the land is held there. So here we have that land grant that we've just been looking at. It's been entered into the Bureau of Land Management. And here is the patent as it appears in the Bureau of Land Management holdings. So this land grant was upheld, and that's why it was allowed to be in that collection. As noted earlier, testimony from those who remembered the original layout of a land grant could be used in land claims under the US government. The testimony is often rich with family history details. The details in this testimony tell of names of persons residing on the land, the number of horses and cattle they owned, and the number of acres they cultivated. So this includes the information stated by a witness. She remembers in 1845 when she's speaking, she remembers back in the 1820s that Joaquin Moraga and Juan Bernal lived on the rancho with their families. She remembers that each had a wooden house and that together they cultivated 100 acres of land. This is recorded in a book that is available at Google Books. This testimony details changes in landscape. So Elam Brown says that a large lake which existed at the time of the original grant has now been filled in with land by washings from the plowed land. And the testator, Elam Brown, was a significant developer in the area. So this testimony that he provides adds to what is known about him, and it also adds to what is known about his neighbors about whom he's speaking, and of course about the changes in the landscape. So just one example of the kind of detail that you can find. When paperwork was lost or misplaced, more paperwork was created in the courts, documenting the issue. This particular record does not appear in the database index. So it's worthwhile to browse records, as indexing of databases can be incomplete in some cases. This record details a petition which has been mislaid, and since it's brought to the attention of the Mexican courts, it was resolved there, as you see in the slide I'll show you in just a minute. The diseños were also used in land disputes. The heirs of Joaquin Moraga and Juan Bernal and the Acalanes land grantees, they disputed the boundary between their grants because they both wanted access to the water that lay between their grants. This again was settled in the Mexican courts. And here's a settlement of the boundaries between Candelario Valencia and Joaquin Moraga. It enters the total packet in the land claim dockets that were preserved by the US government and that you can see at Ancestry. The Las Mariposas land grant is very interesting and provides a lot of details for historical research because it went through the court process for a long time with a lot of testimony. And the reason was there was no original diseño, there was no original map that was created for it. So there is a diseño, but this map was drawn long after the land was granted, and it was just drawn in order to comply with the requirements. So the testimony describes that it was very difficult to get to the area that was being surveyed, and so for that reason, it was not done. And I suppose that was accepted because eventually this land grant was upheld after the long litigation. The land grant was given to John C. Fremont by Mexican Governor Juan B. Alvarado. The gold rush era, of course, affected the population and settlement in land grant eras. It began shortly after statehood and shortly before statehood and continued after statehood. So it fell at a time when the land grant situation had entered its own uncertainty. Squatters took possession of parts of land grants. This led to court cases and sometimes to violence. Land was also sold by families, which were getting larger. The land grants were so large that it was possible for squatters to easily take up portions of them without really encroaching on the property that was being used by the grantee. After California became a state, the land grant issues diminished greatly in size. The very dark green there shows you what remained between 1877 and 1972, not very much area. The very light green shows you what existed in 1856 to 1863, and then the middle green shows you between 1864 and 1876. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about mission records. They are very, very excellent in describing the families that inhabited Alta California. The main records which provide information on a family are the birth, marriage, and burial records. These, paired with the court records and other land grant records, can really help to tell the story of an Alta California family. Missions served as religious centers for the new communities, and the population was very connected to Pueblo and Presidio life, as I mentioned before. So understanding that this was very interconnected is helpful as you look for the records. As noted earlier, Native Americans played an important role in mission life and culture, and they provided a great deal of the work. This image shows a ceiling painted by Ohlone Native Americans. Other work included contract work at Presidios, which again is documented in Pueblo letters. This dedication document is preserved along with other documents for this mission. Names and dates are preserved in the context of the place. If you look to where the arrow is pointing, it shows you the signature of Father Junipero Serra, who signed this document. And within the document, there are also other names of people who are mentioned by him in his dedication speech. The mission Santa Clara was dedicated in 1784 by Father Junipero Serra, and this is just an example of another type of document besides the births, marriages, and deaths. There are a lot of administrative documents that can be found, and some of these documents shed light on families. So here are some really important sources that contribute to our knowledge of genealogy that use mission records. The Huntington Library Early California Population Project database is excellent, and it's my first go-to for records on Alta California families. Then there are Dorothy Mutnick books, which we'll talk about in a bit, and Thomas Workman Temple books and Marie Northrup books. They all they all show compilations of Spanish and Mexican families in Alta California. Very, very useful. So the Huntington Library Early California population project takes a bit of time to get acquainted with because it's a very complex database. Again, it's very useful and totally worth the time that you spend getting acquainted with it. A good place to start is about the ECPP, followed by search tips. But of course, you may want to just dive in and click on the red tab that says search the database. And that's fine. You'll probably be brought back to the search tips, which again is fine. It's good to work back and forth. So you select the record type, and then you add the criteria such as father's surname. The records are cross-indexed so that when you locate a person of interest, you can find all the other records connected to that person in the database. It's a very excellent system of cross-indexing. So in this case, you see at the top, the record type that's being selected is baptismal. And then you see to the left, there's criterion, and you select one of those criterion, and there are many. So you're going to figure out which criterion you're going to want, put it in, and put in clause and. Here is an example of a basic search, again for baptism. So you see to the right, baptismal has been selected under record type. Then the ego Spanish name, and ego is the self or the person, and Spanish is your first name. So those are little key terms to know. In this case, they have entered Mariano. So ego Spanish name is the criterion, value Mariano. Then you're going to add the clause and choose another criterion. The second criterion you choose is Castro, an ego's surname. Then we see what would we get if we did this, and we will get all of the records that correspond to someone named Mariano Castro in terms of a baptismal record. There might be more than one, there might be just one. Then we narrow it down. We'll go to another example. So I searched for the ego or the self with the Spanish name Joaquin and the surname Moraga. I got 3 hits to evaluate from that search for baptism. The arrow shows you there's the one that I wanted. I know I don't want Ana Joaquina Petra. I know I don't want Maria de Jesus Joaquina Maxima. I want Jose Joaquin de la Santísima Trinidad Moraga. That's what I want. So that's the one that I choose to click on to further evaluate. The results from that search show me that Joaquin Moraga was baptized as a niño, or a boy, so not at the time of his birth. The page shows his baptism date, the names of both of his parents, including his mother's maiden name, the military role his father played, the presidio with which his father was associated, the residence of the family, and the names of the godparents. So what more would you want if you're a genealogist looking for information on a family? It's excellent. The mission shows a code of SC, which I can check against abbreviations list to see just what mission are they referencing. And I have found in my own research that going with my intuition as to what it might stand for, I tend to be wrong. So I like to check the abbreviations database every once in a while just to make sure I'm on the right track with identifying the correct mission. Now, sometimes there is a scanned image that accompanies the results in the page from the search. And that's great because then you can see the original record and you can save a copy of it. In this case, there wasn't. So I can go on and find more records. In this case, I did. And I found a marriage record for Joaquin Moraga. It details his marriage at Mission Dolores, which is in San Francisco, still standing, to Maria Francisco Castro in 1813. It tells in that marriage record, again, who his father is. So that confirms Gabriel Moraga was his father. It tells me where he was residing at the time of his marriage and that his mother has passed away, the date of the marriage, and then the name of his bride and of her parents. And then I can go and investigate them as well through the same mission records if I wish, all the way back to the original date of migration up from Mexico. I then found all of the children that were born to the couple, Joaquin Moraga and Maria Francisca Castro, and baptized in missions. So we have the complete list there, and you can see that they were not all baptized in the same mission. I have the arrow pointing to Jose de Jesus, who was the land grantee. The scan below shows a scan of one of the children's baptisms. So again, some of them will be scanned, and they are just beautiful scanned images. while others will not have that accompanying images. So it's good when you're looking for a family group to bear in mind that the baptisms, marriages, and burials might all take place at various missions, even for the same family. So be open-minded in your searches and be willing to look at the same surname and same surname, sometimes spelled in different ways, in different mission locations and different Presidio locations. An additional source for mission records, as I mentioned before, is the books of Dorothy Mutnick. So she wrote some Alta California pioneers and their descendants, Division 1, and it's privately published, available in a few libraries. She has put together family groups, and like the database, it's cross-indexed. So there's a lot of little symbols in there in the book. You can cross-reference to see where were they born, who did they marry, how did the family group change, and so on. And ideally, you can compare her work, the results of the family searches you're doing through her work, to searches in the early California population project, so that you can see perhaps one or the other has misidentified someone, and you can verify for yourself the family unit. They're both very accurate, by the way, but once in a while there's a difference. Family information can further be broadened by consulting diaries, family files, and online census records, and of course, cemetery listings. The 1852 census, even though you can see it's all smeared and damaged, it shows the family of Joaquin Moraga in complete detail. He was a rancherio of Redwood Ranch and was residing on his land grant under the U.S. government in that year. He died shortly after that time, just after the land grant was initially confirmed by the U.S. government. A cabinet photo of his wife, Maria Cibrian, is shown there, and his daughter-in-law, sorry, is shown there. And that is found through Historical Society family files. This land grant was upheld by the U.S. government, but the property was slowly lost due to the expanding family and by the lengthy court case. By 1890, the heirs of the original grantees owned none of the land, and in fact, the last inhabitants of the adobe on the land were evicted. This diary entry tells us the date and death of the grantee Joaquin Moraga and also provides his burial location. Diary entries can be very helpful in rounding out information on grantees. So they're a good resource to keep in mind while you're trying to put together a family unit. Some of the useful databases to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, California Private Land Claim Dockets, a database on ancestry, California Spanish Land Records, database on ancestry, the Hornbeck collection of private land claims by county for diseños and details of the claims as compiled by the Works Projects Administration at California State University at Monterey Bay, and again, the Online Archive of California. And just a few more. Be sure to consider the vertical files held at historical societies. Again, the California Census, the Online Archive of California, Find a Grave. The Great Register shows you California voters from 1866 to 1910. Land grant databases. Los Californianos website traces the descendants of the De Anza expedition and early settlers in Alta California, and has published a great deal of information on these family groups. Again, the Early California Population Project, great for those mission records. The works of Hubert Howe Bancroft, who really documented a lot of these families in his many volumes of work on California. The works of Thomas Workman Temple and Dorothy Mutnick. Court records online and in repositories, and is published in online books. So California is indeed very rich in history. The time period from the De Anza expeditions to the Spanish and Mexican land grants lives on in the documents from that time and in our historical and cultural background. It informs the state as it is today. Thank you so much for participating, and I hope you have happy hunting for more California history nuggets, and that you will contact me with your comments, observations, and questions as you search for the families of Alta California.
Thank you, Susan, for a very, very interesting presentation. And I'd also like to thank all of our members of our virtual audience. And I want to give a quick reminder that the recording and the handouts will be available to those of you who paid for the right to this lecture. These items will be available until October 10th. On behalf of the Southern California Genealogical Society's 2021 Virtual Jamboree, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.